And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan, and this is your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Thursday, October 2nd, 2025. Starting out with the state of the sea ice, we have a little bit of ice there between Utqiagvik and Prudhoe Bay, very early season ice trying to form. The thing is, coming up this weekend and into next week, we're going to have a push of milder air coming in from the south and west, from the Bering and North Pacific, and some of that air, as it comes northward, it'll obviously modify, but we're not going to see really cold temperatures across this region as what you might if you had a northwesterly flow of air. So that's going to be one thing that may just kind of delay a little faster onset of some new season ice. But looking at the satellite imagery on this Thursday afternoon, stream of moisture coming in along the northeastern Gulf Coast and spilling down along the Panhandle for this Thursday evening and into Friday morning. It'll start to let up Friday afternoon and evening as this little ridge of high pressure behind it kind of tries to come on in through the Yakutat area tomorrow. But we've seen some sunshine today around the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and Cook Inlet. Back to the west is the next weather maker. A storm force low will take shape and cross between Adak and Shemya on Friday later morning and early afternoon. And as that low tracks northeastward, it'll pull further back toward the north and west with an occluded front working its way up along the west coast. And this front will have some stronger winds, at least perhaps gale force or near gale force as it gets up here along Kuskokwim Bay and especially up through the Bering Strait. So areas of the west coast from Wales down through Nome along Norton Sound and the lower Yukon Delta are under a coastal flood advisory later Friday afternoon through early Sunday morning. And then for Kuskokwim Bay, also expect some higher water levels, higher surf levels as the result of these stronger winds with that front. And that's just going to pull in milder air up into the southwest interior as we get into later Saturday and on Sunday. So here's where the low will be come Friday afternoon. It'll be north of the Aleutian Chain in the central lower Bering Sea. It's going to bottom out just above 70 millibars. And there's some very warm, moist air south of the Alaska Peninsula that's going to try and come northeastward. It'll eventually ride up along the Alaska Peninsula and on up to Kodiak Island here as we get into Saturday. Should begin to dry out in the northern Panhandle Friday afternoon as this low weakens and slides southeastward. And then for Saturday, we have a ridge of high pressure bringing some drier weather to the Panhandle, but here comes that nudge of warm, moist air up along Kodiak Island toward the western parts of the Gulf outside of Cook Inlet. Could have temperatures 58 to near 60 degrees at Kodiak City. And meanwhile, these stronger southerly winds along the lower Yukon coast and especially the south shore here of the Seward Peninsula from around Nome to Galavat. You can see elevated water levels 2 to 5 feet above the normal higher tide line between later Friday afternoon and early Sunday morning. And as the low here gradually begins to weaken later in the weekend, early next week, this will become the next low that rides up along the Alaska Peninsula and brings a renewed area of precipitation to the western Gulf and Cook Inlet area as we go into later Sunday, Monday. It's going to be quite wet Saturday night into Sunday morning across this region as a result of that system. So looking at winds Friday for the inner channels of the Panhandle, southeast winds 15 knots there, Lynn Canal down through Petersburg, waves 2-3 feet. Down here in Dixon Entrance, south winds of 25 knots, 6-foot waves, 5-6-foot waves, Ketchikan, Metlakatla. Outer coast, northwest winds 20 knots off of Craig, waves 9 feet, and then westerly winds into Sitka, Port Alexander at 15 knots. Waves 8-9 feet, and then out to the further northwest winds 10 knots outside of Yakutat Bay and Cape Suckling with 7 to 8 foot waves. Winds will come down for Saturday across the southeast. Kind of variable winds 5 to 10 knots within the inner channels, waves only a foot or two. For the outer coast outside of Cross Sound down through Port Alexander, we're looking at west winds of 10 knots. As we go back up to the north and west, outside of Yakutat Bay to Cape Suckling, east winds of 15 to 20 knots and 4 to 5 foot waves. So on Friday, we find winds strongest out toward Cook Inlet. Southwest winds 25 knots off of Anchor Point up to Upper Cook Inlet with waves of 4 to 6 feet. Lower Cook Inlet and northeast of Kodiak Island, west winds of 25 knots, waves around 5 feet. and we find waves off of the eastern Kenai coastline 6 to 8 feet, and within Prince William Sound, southwest winds 10 knots and waves a couple of feet. For Saturday, winds will be southeasterly to 30 knots outside of Hinchinbrook entrance with 6 to 7 foot waves. East winds 20 knots, 4 foot waves Prince William Sound. Upper and Middle Cook Inlet, northeast winds of 15 knots with waves of 2 to 3 feet. And then for Kennedy entrance into Lower Cook Inlet, southeast winds of 25 knots with waves around 5 feet. For Friday, Kodiak Island will see southwest winds 25 to 20 knots, waves right around 5 feet. As we trail out down along the Alaska Peninsula, generally southerly winds, and winds will be picking up, especially on the north side toward Cold Bay, 25 to 30 knot south winds with waves of 5 feet. And then on Saturday, winds will be southeast to south, 20 to 25 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island. And again, we'll have periods of rain, mild temperatures, 50s to near 60 in a few spots. And then generally southerly winds at 25 knots down the length of the Alaska Peninsula. Waves running right around 5-6 feet on the North Pacific side, 4 to 5 feet on the Bering side. Strongest winds Friday and across the state will be out here in the central Aleutians. We have a storm warning in effect, Atka through Adak and Kiska. 50 knot southerly storm force winds. Eastern Aleutians 25 to 30 knots around Unalaska, but 45 knot gales near and west of Nikolsky. And on Saturday, winds will still be southerly, 25 knots in the vicinity of Unalaska, shifting southwest, and then becoming more westerly. Central Aleutians, Adak back toward Kiska, westerly at 30 knots before turning more northwesterly, Kiska to Shemya. And for the Pribilofs, southerly gales of 40 knots on Friday, waves 10-12 feet. We'll have a southwest wind of 15 knots into Bristol Bay, south wind of 25 knots into Kuskokwim Bay, with the stronger winds arriving Friday night into Saturday morning. Along the lower Yukon coast, south-southeast winds of 20 knots turning westerly into Northern Sound right around 20 knots with waves certainly 3-4 feet. And then stronger winds come in for Saturday with that front, especially along and behind the front. We're anticipating 25 knot south winds into Bristol Bay, 35 knot southerly gales into Kuskokwim Bay, and with some higher wave action, some of the waves running as high as 8 to 10 feet there, especially along the west end of Kuskokwim Bay, Kwagilingak on over toward Kipnik. And then up here along the Yukon coast, south winds of 35 knots in Macorik Island, but off the lower Yukon coast up through Norton Sound, southeast winds to 30 knots with waves 6 to 8 feet, and northwest winds shifting northwesterly 40 knots at St. Matthew with waves there 15 to 20 feet. Through the Bering Strait, along the west side of the Seward Peninsula, north winds 50 knots turning westerly along the north side of St. Lawrence Island with waves 5-6 feet. Lower Chukchi Sea winds will be northerly turning northwesterly 15 to 20 knots. Further northward we find winds north-northwest 5 to 10 knots along the Beaufort Sea coast from Utqiagvik to Kaktovik with waves just a couple of feet. And then on Saturday, winds are going to go easterly along the Beaufort Sea coast, southeast to east winds from Kaktovik to Utqiagvik with waves again around a foot or two. As we come on down, though, along the Chukchi Sea coast, east to northeast winds 25 knots, waves 5 to 6 feet. And as we pass down through the Bering Strait, some stronger winds coming in offshore off the Seward Peninsula there at Wales, Port Clarence. Easterly winds to 30 knots, waves 8 feet. And on Saturday for the north side of St. Lawrence Island, especially toward Gamble, you're going to see easterly gales of 35 knots with waves running 8 to 11 feet.